All right. Welcome, everyone, to a new episode of the Roscoe's Wetsuit podcast. I am with a very special guest today, Dr. Paolo Cassano. Dr. Cassano is a really interesting guy. He's an assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and the director of photobiomodulation at the Massachusetts General Hospital Depression and Clinical Research Program, principal investigator at the MGH Center for Anxiety and Traumatic Stress Disorders, and also the head of the Division of Neuropsychiatry. Dr. Cassano has led multiple studies on transcranial photobiomodulation with near-infrared light for anxiety and mood disorders. And his translational studies have focused on the effects of near-infrared light on mitochondria, cerebral blood flow, on brain electrical activity, looking at EEGs, and on autonomic reactivity such as heart rate variability. For his studies on photobiomodulation, he was awarded competitive national grants such as the Brain and Behavior Research Foundation, NARSAD. He was also the principal investigator on several multi-center clinical trials sponsored by private companies to test photobiomodulation for anxiety and depression. All right, Dr. Cassano, I could keep going on and on, but I'll just welcome you to the show.
Thank you so much, Toby. Just a quick correction. I'm not the head of the neuropsychiatry division, but I'm the director of photobiomodulation there.
I
And
see. Okay.
thank you for these kind words, though.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for the correction. So I'm curious, you've got into a very interesting kind of unique, line of work right now. How did you originally find out about photobiomodulation? What kind of piqued your curiosity in it?
Yeah. Back then I had just finished my residency training in psychiatry at Mass General Hospital in McLean. And I used to be a research fellow at the depression program before the training. And after the training, I was very interested in international psychiatry. This has been a passion of mine, international psychiatry and international work. As a matter of fact, to begin with, I started as an infectious disease researcher back in the days when I was in Europe. And my goal was eventually to go back to international work. Then half serendipitously, I ended up in psychiatry. And, I thought that international part of my soul was set aside. And I then rediscover it in my work with community psychiatry here in the Boston area with Latinos, Caribbeans. So after my training, I was working with Latinos in these practices in the community clinics, and I realized that my patients didn't really like what I had to offer, didn't like my medications. They thought this medication could potentially poison them. There were some weird, maybe cultural stereotypes of saying, well, what if I lose my fertility as a result of taking these medications? And so I was the community psychiatrist there, kind of battling and trying to find out treatments that would help them. And yet I had my links and my connections with the depression program at Massachusetts General Hospital. And on the depression program side, we were kind of intrigued that depression was, according to our research, a low brain metabolism condition. And in the field of neuroscience, some very cool large clinical trials on stroke were going on at that time. And the idea was really to energize the brain when the blood flow wasn't coming anymore. And then we thought, okay, well, what if we bring that to depression? and we use the light, the photobiomodulation, to energize the brain and get this kind of remedy. So that made a lot of sense in the depression program, but made a lot of sense in my community clinic, because I said, well, maybe light, I kind of, the bulb was lighting up in my mind. It says that that's what my patient will want. That's what they will take. Finally, I have something to offer. And so that's how we started.
That's awesome. So I'm curious, and our listeners, who might, some of them may know something about photobiomodulation, some, may never have heard of it. I've mentioned it on the show a few times before, but I'm curious if, and especially to hear from your perspective, how is light at this uh, light in this specific spectrum, how is this affecting the brain and the mitochondria?
Yes, so we are talking about invisible light. For years, all the focus of photopsychiatry has been on bright light. Everybody knows about SAD lamps and kind of a seasonal affective disorder lamp and the importance of visible light. But invisible light is half of the light at the ground that the sun is shedding. So there's a huge amount of what we call infrared light that we receive, especially during summertime when we're outdoor. So that's very intriguing, that there's so much light that hasn't been studied yet, or at least had not been studied until about 15 years ago, as concerns the brain. What is interesting is that this light penetrates. Although it's a minimal amount, maybe at 2%, that penetrates all the skin, the skull, all the meningeal, kind of the whatever is the coating of our brain, and gets to the brain. And what is amazing is that we're used to hear about the plants absorbing light and making energy. Well, the truth is that we all absorb light. Bacteria do it, eukaryotes, which is us, and other forms of life, including the animal worlds, as much as the other nature. So that light can be converted into energy, and that happens at the level of mitochondria. So there are specific what we call photoacceptors, which are molecules that are going to absorb the light and make energy out of it. And what is amazing is that that's the same pattern, or I should say, um, the same cascade of reactions that is used to metabolize the food that we ingest and make energy out of it. And we are bypassing with the light, getting to the end of that chain, which is called respiratory chain. And it's where the cell breathes oxygen and makes energy out of it. And the light conveys energy right there.
Okay. Okay. And then, so going back to the sort of premise of depression as being kind of sort of a metabolic issue as far as the low blood flow. So this light then can increase that blood flow by stimulating the mitochondria. Is that a correct explanation, or is there more to it?
The light does so many things. And so it all depends how, at which level you want to get. So you want to talk about the cell? Do you want to talk about the brain? If you talk about the cell, I can tell you there's more energy, there's more ATP in the cell. So the cells are energized. And that has been seen in cultures, neuronal cultures, animal models, you name it. But that's not just the only thing that happened. there is a little spike of oxidation. We're all afraid of oxidation, but it turns out that a little bit of it is actually good. And there is a reaction to that, which is an antioxidant effect. So that kind of evil effect of oxygen that attacks your cells and destroys the membranes can be actually reduced to the light, from the light. There's also, probably as a result of that, less inflammation. So the kind of the storm of cytokines, those molecules that float around, call for other blood cells to fight and go against germs, but oftentimes producing even more damage to the tissue, that goes down. So there is an anti-inflammatory effect, which is also very good. And also there is, you could say, a rejuvenating effect. That is an effect on neurogenesis, synaptogenesis, and those good molecules that are the BDNF, the brain-derived neurotrophic factors, the NGF, and others come out, and that allows our brain to branch more, to form more connections, which is the basis of the anatomical basis for them, the functioning and the firing. And there's also a change in the polarity of the membrane, which are immediate functional changes. So these are very important effects, and they might seem a little foreign here, although we are used to saying, okay, well, this vitamins actually is antioxidant, this is good for your skin, and so on. It turns out that a lot of the brain diseases share all these pathways. We're now hearing more and more about neuroinflammation, and that's true for depression, it's true for Alzheimer's, and many other conditions have these problems. Oxidation, same thing. Low mitochondrial functioning, same thing. So hypometabolic states, it's not unique of depression. Many disorders have that issue. So when you have a treatment that does so many things, that's really intriguing and really exciting as well. And we can talk more, and if you wish, compare this to other treatments and how potentially unique this is. But if you want to get out from this microscopic vision of the cell and get to the brain, it's as fascinating. And we don't really know how the overall picture of the brain changes actually fit with the molecular or cellular changes I just described. But I can tell you what happens to the brain. You're absolutely right. Blood flow goes up. And that's true for any organ that has infrared light placed on. If you do it on your skin, you'll see it on your skin, on the muscles, on the joints. That's actually where this all started before getting to the skull and to the brain. So blood flow goes up. And what is thought as the reason for that is the release of nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is that key molecules that kind of vasodilate, opens your vessels, and actually it's one of those molecules that is good for all issues like even erectile dysfunction, just for the same reasons. But it's not just blood flow. Your brain activity goes up. So those fast waves, so when you look at your brain and you look at the electrical activity, there is a certain frequency, a certain pace that your brain takes. And you can go from normally from a slow pace when you're sleeping, when you're in a meditation state, to a fast pace, if you're concentrating, you're focusing, you're trying to remember something. And so you can get that shift towards the faster ways with the light as well. And then you can also microscopically see a greater level of oxygenation in your brain. And also the photoacceptor I was mentioning, which is a cytochrome C oxidase in the mitochondria, also changes redox state. It means like it becomes more oxidated, signaling that our target has been engaged. So at least these are some of the primary changes. People have seen connectivity as a change. Connectivity is a fancy term to say that different brain areas are talking to each other more as a result of this stimulation. And people have seen the metabolic lighting up of certain areas, like in PET. So these are some of the changes.
Yeah, this is all super fascinating. And I'm curious, I want to pose the question to you of, with all the, sort of research studies that you've been a part of or led, what have been the most intriguing findings that have really stood out to you or really shocked you about, photobiomodulation's impact on the EEG or heart rate variability, mitochondria, cerebral blood flow? What stood out?
Well, I think that what was most intriguing for me was the fact that even now we're talking about photobiomodulation or transcranial photobiomodulation, you and I, and we're talking about this as if it were one thing. And I'm not quite sure that's the case. If you were telling me, let's talk about electrical stimulation, it seems like that's something you do, and you're familiar with transcranial direct current stimulation, transcranial alternating current stimulation. However, you also know that if you crank up the energy, you get to electroconvulsive therapy. And if you change it, the way you deliver it, and rather than delivering an electric current, you create a magnetic field, that you can do transcranial magnetic stimulation. And we know that the effects are different. Now, in our research, we're kind of finding that depending on how much light we give, we can produce a different effect. So all what I told you so far is true, but it seems like depending on the dose, you might actually have an increase in blood flow and an increase in those fast brain waves, which show the electrical activity of our brain, or just have an increase in the fast brain waves without an effect on blood flow. Now, these are unreplicated finding, which is a fancy word to say that we need more research.
So from my understanding, you can pulse this light at different frequencies. Um, what do we know as far as, I mean, I've seen some of the commercial devices they offer, have an alpha device and a gamma device, stimulating like a 10 hertz alpha rhythm or a 40 hertz gamma rhythm. I'm curious, what your take is, on these different frequencies. I would assume that there's some that are useful for certain conditions, and then different ones that are useful for other conditions. Is that a fair way to look at it?
It is a fair way to look at it. I agree with you, Toby. Um, the the tricky part is that there's not yet enough science. For instance, the University of Texas has done most of its research with continuous wave, so no pulsing. We have done at Harvard, Mass General Hospital, most of our research with continuous wave as well. They have done mostly healthy subjects. We have done mostly depression, anxiety, and then some healthy subjects as well. Other groups have looked at pulse wave. They have looked, however, one specific frequency, like 10 hertz, and these are groups in Canada and also in California as well, University of California. So nobody has really compared one type of light to the other, but I can tell you, um, since I am a clinician, I see the effects in my patients. And in Mass General Hospital, we have a photobiomodulation clinic in the Department of Psychiatry. I'm directing that. And although this is not an approved treatment, neither for depression or anxiety, because people are in hoping for new treatments, and sometimes they are either resistant, meaning they're not responding to available treatments, or they have side effects with available antidepressant medications, or they're just looking for something else. And because this is a safe and inexpensive treatment, photobiomodulation, we offer it under very specific circumstances, which is our clinic. And we see the difference. So I can tell you that 10 hertz, it's a very relaxing frequency, and it's good for sleep as well. So it's good for anxiety. 40 hertz is most likely a more antidepressant frequency, more activating overall, and also better for a cognitive boost, which is obviously an issue in depression, but also could be an issue outside of depression in many other cognitive disorders.
Sure. And this is, I mean, this is fascinating that you're actually using this, in a clinical setting to treat patients. Is this something that you see, you know, 5, 10, 20 years down the road? Do you see a lot more of these sort of clinical applications popping up? Is this going to be, where if someone goes to their psychiatrist, are they going to, have access to these photobiomodulation therapies?
There's no question. There's no question. Um, I guess where we should kind of wait and see is what's the timeline. But this is going to happen. This is a radically different method of neurostimulation. It is neurostimulation, however, many other treatments, including TDCS or TACS or TMS, have not shown, for instance, a so clear-cut antioxidant, anti-inflammatory effect. So this treatment of photobiomodulation not only has the potential of pacing the brain, but has all these effects, including the fact that it's not just driving the brain to a certain pace, but is also refueling the cells, which is probably critical if you want to have that performance ongoing in many of these disorders, you name it, whether it's depression, neurodegenerative conditions. So these are key aspects of this treatment that are going to be very critical. Now, this is all theory, and also obviously the science is supporting it. But I could easily talk about the clinical outcomes and the patients.
Yeah, and actually that's something I'd love to hear about as far as, what, we touched on depression. What other sort of conditions or maybe aspects of cognition can be most improved or modulated by using this photobiomodulation?
Yeah, so one aspect that I'm really interested in these days is mild cognitive impairment. Um, that is also for personal reasons. My father actually, he's in his early 80s and started to have some mild cognitive impairment. And this goes back to what you asked me, what led me into this. And I told you about my very beginning about more than 10 years ago, how I came in photobiomodulation. But I think there have been many beginnings. And for instance, as a clinician, as a scientist, I started, yes, 10 years ago to be interested in photobiomodulation. And then as an entrepreneur, I started about 3.5 years ago, thinking, okay, well, just we need to have not just science here, but also have devices that are available to people. And we can't wait 10 years. Or at least we cannot wait other 10 years. And the reason is also personal, thinking, how to give back to people that gave to me. And my father has been a psychiatrist. I worked in Italy with him for a while before coming to the States. He's by training a neuropsychopharmacologist. And and so I wanted this for him, for my family, for others. um, and and this comes back to what I've seen. um, Although the company I co-founded doesn't have a device yet in the market, the device was available to me, and I gave it to my father. And just yesterday I was on the phone with my brother and asking him, hey, how's dad doing? And he's saying, well, look, I mean, he's on the phone all the time and he's talking to so many people. He's not just in the couch. He's and I spoke with my dad, and he tells me, yes, I know I'm talking better. And I don't struggle with word finding. And these are things that we've seen in our family. And it's been so rewarding to see all that. And I just want to bring this forward. And to answer your questions, there are applications that span from the entire lifespan, from neurodevelopmental diseases to elderly and mild cognitive impairment up to dementia. There are studies on dementia, although mostly uncontrolled studies, that have shown an improvement. And also, when you withdraw the treatment, a drop in cognitive functioning. Um, and But there are preliminary data also in neurodevelopmental conditions. With some Italian clinicians and colleagues, we've studied the effect in Down syndrome. Even there, I have a nephew that has Down syndrome, and so we tried the light. He's 5-year-old, and although this is all very preliminary, and with this, I'm not advising anyone to use the light without clinical supervision if they have a condition, a clinical condition. If they have a clinical condition, anyone should always seek for help, professional help. But because I am a professional, and I could sort of guide some family members, and this guy that wasn't really talking could tell to his mom, when called to do something, it says, "Ma, I watch TV." And now he's putting a kind of full sentence together. from being pre-verbal to being able to talk and express yourself. And this was my experience in my family, but in this small study of case reports, other effects like mood regulation, motor skills, drawing in children, pre-adolescent children, were seen by the parents when they had this treatment. So there are pronounced cognitive effects that can be noticed. And if you allow me one more thing, even in healthy subjects, even you and I, if do the transcranial light, can have a boost in performance. So there's an entire field of studies, and that's where most of the evidence is in cognitive performance in the healthy. So it's big.
That's incredible that, with your father and nephew, I love, how you tie in the personal element and you're actually able to see, how all of this research, all this hard work of yours, is actually paying off in such a personal way. That's a really cool story. Um, I wanted to sort of touch on something that you mentioned before, as far as um, you studied clinical neuropsychopharmacology in Italy. You were mentioning, I think, with your father,
Mhm.
um, and I'm curious as far as maybe what you took out of that program, and also I'm just curious as far as what differs, in the Italian or more general kind of European way of approaching psychiatry compared to what we do here in the States.
Yeah. No, thank you for asking the question. It's a tough question because I work in a center of excellence, the University of Pisa in Italy. And then I came here in similarly a center of excellence at Harbor and Mass General Hospital in the United States. So I don't know how that generalizes to the States or to Italy. I can tell you some differences I've seen. Well, for one thing, the resources. Research, it's much less funded. We don't have such a powerful National Institute of Health, which is so well funded in Italy. There is one, obviously, but not so many funding go to the different sites. Um, so there are less clinical trials. There's less research overall. However, there is a lot of research that is not about new treatments. There's a lot of emphasis in understanding what we call psychopathology and understanding the signs, kind of um, the deeper symptoms and what to make of it and how to classify the different subtypes of depression or other conditions. We talk about depression, but with the current criteria, there are hundreds of types of depression that you can make out of those criteria if you go through the different combination of symptoms. And that's what in Italy people tend to study. But obviously, this is a generalization. There are obviously treatment studies as well. Um, we see many more patients in Italy. There's a heavy load of clinical, even in tertiary care. And people are less specialized. So what you told people about me is that I work in neuropsychiatry, I work in the depression and anxiety, and I'm a photopsychiatrist. So here, there are very clear labels. In Italy, you're more of a generalist. You might have, even at the university, some specific interest, but then you treat pretty much everything. Here, a little less so. Yes, we are generalists. I am a community psychiatrist and see all sort of conditions, but at Mass General Hospital, I tend to see more depression or anxiety or now a little more cognitive disorders. Um, so these are some of the differences that come to mind. There's obviously the entire culture of academia that is different there compared to here. People here talk to each other, and you go by your first name, whether you're the senior professor or chair, or but there's some people are professors, some people are doctors, some people are neither doctors nor professors. So um, there's the culture. The culture is different.
Sure, sure. Yeah, those are some very interesting differences. I'm curious, you mentioned, this is actually a question I wanted to ask you before, but as far as, with a condition like depression, I've seen at my undergraduate university, there were a few research labs, I believe, that were looking at C-reactive protein, an inflammatory marker, and its connection with depression. And I know we touched on, kind of how, in part, the photobiomodulation is working by decreasing neural inflammation. So I'm curious, how else, what other tests or how else can we sort of measure, brain function? What other biomarkers are there when it comes to human studies?
So so it depends. So you could obviously go with inflammatory biomarkers, interleukins, like interleukin 1, 6, or TNF alpha, interferon gamma. You can look at those changes in the plasma. And those are all part of this kind of inflammatory storm that you can quiet down with the light. You can look at BDNF, the neurotrophic, kind of the rejuvenating factors that can also be circulating as a result of that. Um, However, I believe the best markers are neurophysiological markers. There's no questions that based on the healthy subject studies, and even in our group, changes happen in minutes, whether it's the blood flow increase, whether it's the oxygenation of the brain, whether it's the pacing of the brain, the electrophysiological change. This happens, on a snap. And they are directly recordable from the brain as opposed to looking at the impact on the blood. And they can be recorded in easy way, non-invasive ways. If you were to buy a device and you wanted to buy some EEG recording, you could do it for yourself. Now, you are an expert on these things, so you would do it anyway. You have a lab to do it, Toby. But, the average guy that is doing something else could just do it, and see what's the effect on my brain.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, I'm curious, you just mentioned the EEGs, and that's kind of my experience, with recording and doing the stimulation, neurofeedback. I'm curious, from my perspective, I kind of see all of these different technologies, including the photobiomodulation, really being the future, of psychiatry. I'm curious if you see it the same way, if you see, in the future there being less prescription medications, more kind of natural treatments, or maybe an integration of both sides of things. I'm just curious, or what other sort of technologies do you think can really make an impact in the future of psychiatry?
Well, it's clear that taking a pill is easy. And so that's one thing. The other thing is you have to think about what's our age culture. We live in an age of medicine. So when you think about treating people, it's called study medicine. And those are about medications, medicines. And so there's a cultural change that needs to happen, a huge one, in order to move from that to integrating other modalities. I don't know what's the timeline for that, because unless it changes in medical school, um, it's going to take a long time. And are going to be the business or businesses or the companies so powerful to drive this change as they have been for medications. So again, I don't know how quickly we're going to move from this to the next step. And just to make an example that probably people will kind of get better and will resonate with a lot of us, let's think about nutrition. Everybody knows how nutrition, how important it is. You know, if you feed your brain the right way, you name it, whether it's the ketonic diet or you know, what is the, you know, low sugar diet and so forth, you know that your performance can improve. We know it, but how often do we hear it from our providers? How often, you know, we hear specific guidelines? You know, oftentimes you go to your primary care and they tell you, well, watch out your cholesterol. Don't eat too much of that, because that has been tied to, you know, the different medications, whether it's low cholesterol drugs and so forth. But you don't hear much more of that. And why? Because we, the physicians, and I put myself in that, are not trained and we don't know much about it. It's not an easy solution to offer. It takes time to explain that. It takes time to learn it. So photobiomodulation, like any alternative treatment, will have to go through the same path. It might take some time before it gets to you and me through our physicians. However, these devices are safe. They are already in the wellness space. So some of these devices can be accessed, you know, in the market.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like just you know, a question of when, not, you know, not if. It seems like they're you know, gonna come. I'm just curious, you know, as far as, you know, when we end up seeing that happening and what it's gonna look like. But I think, you know, we can see some real profound positive changes coming forward, you know, with the usage of all these technologies.
Yeah, if I may, Toby, you know, I agree with you. It's not if, but when. And, you know, it's not a kind of an abstract prediction. If you look back, and you know, it's really cool that you're working on this. You work on, as I said, TDCS, GACS. You're familiar with this, and you might be familiar with the fact that device-based treatments have been notoriously and still are the most effective treatments in psychiatry. So ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulations, these are the most effective treatments, for instance, for depression, but they're also most effective ECT for catatonia. So it's not just depression. And you name it, you know, there are other treatments like vagus nervous stimulations, deep brain stimulation. So we know that devices have an extraordinary opportunity or potential to be very therapeutic. What we lack so far were devices that you and I could take home. So that's the revolution that is coming. And photobiomodulation among those devices, I think, is placed very well. And the reason is because it's easy. You don't have to wet sponges. You don't have to kind of try to think where to place the light source. You can put it on and go with it. And plus, it has, as I mentioned before, all the other mechanistic advantages compared to the other treatments. And this is not meant to discount all the other treatments. Obviously, I have a bias because I'm a photopsychiatrist, um, but I can see the additional benefits if you follow me.
Well said. Awesome. Well, Dr. Cassano, this has been a fascinating discussion. Um, I'm curious, anything before we wrap up, if you'd like to give, the listeners, if they're curious and want to learn more about any of the studies, research, or clinical applications that you're involved with, feel free to let people know, where they should go.
Yeah, so obviously follow our Mass General Hospital websites. We post our clinical trials there. We have two clinical trials coming up, one in depression, sponsored by the National Institute of Health, and hopefully soon a trial in mild cognitive impairment and also hopefully soon in Down syndrome photobiomodulation. We have our NGH photobiomodulation clinic in the psychiatry department if anyone is interested in getting help. Um, and also listed on this page, I have all my social media. I try to spread the good news, I guess, and reach me out.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Cassano, thank you so much, for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and just, having our listeners and myself be able to absorb, all of your knowledge. And thank you for all your, contributions to the field.
Thank you so much, Toby. It has been an absolute pleasure, and it was so much fun to discuss with you. And the very fact that you are in the device space also was intriguing and interesting in this conversation.
Awesome. Well, if you guys enjoyed the show today, go ahead and like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can find the full episodes at Roscoe's Wetsuit is the YouTube channel. And then go ahead and also follow us on Instagram. We're Roscoe's Wetsuit Podcast. You can find out about any updates, upcoming podcasts that are being recorded or posted. And you can also listen to the audio version of the podcast if you want while you're driving or wherever on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. All right, Dr. Cassano, thanks again.
Thank you.
All right.